right, let's jump right in. Today we're diving deep into, well, you could say, a pretty deep subject. The parting of the Red Sea. It's one of those stories that just grabs you and pulls you in. Exodus chapter 14, that's where we're headed. It's got all that classic drama, but it goes way deeper than just a daring escape.
It's a story that's resonated with people for centuries.
Oh, absolutely. So picture this. The Israelites, fresh out of Egypt, they're on the run. Freedom's calling, but Pharaoh's having second thoughts about letting his workforce go. Now he's leading an army after them. Can you imagine that tension? Freedom on one side, captivity on the other. All right, so Exodus 14, verses 1 through 4, God tells Moses to camp by the sea. Now, if I were there, I got to say, the alarm bells would be ringing in my head. It's like walking straight into a trap, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It looks like a dead end, but that's exactly the point. God's setting the stage. He's going to use this impossible situation to show off his power.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, verses 5 through 9, we find out Pharaoh hears where they are and takes off after them with 600 choice chariots. That detail, it kind of jumped out at me. I mean, it's not just an army. It's like this big display of power, you know?
Oh, yeah. You're picking up on something important there. The Egyptians, they were known for their chariots. Like, that was their thing. It was a symbol of their military might. So Pharaoh's pulling out all the stops here. He's making a statement.
Yeah, he's not messing around. And meanwhile, the Israelites are totally trapped. Sea on one side, this unstoppable force closing in on the other. Verses 10 through 12, it describes their panic, the fear.
Right.
Desperation sets in, and their faith starts to waver. Can you blame them? I mean, they turn on Moses, questioning everything.
It's that moment where their human instinct for survival clashes with their faith. You see the struggle, right? Trying to trust in something you can't see or understand.
Yeah, totally. Then, in verses 13 and 14, we see this total contrast. Moses, in the middle of all this chaos, tells them to stand still. Stand still and witness God's salvation. Stand still when every part of you is screaming, run. How do you think they even process that?
He's not just giving them some empty words. Moses, he's totally convinced that God will step in. It shows how deep his faith is, especially when everyone else is losing theirs.
It's pretty amazing. Okay, so now things start to get really interesting. God tells Moses to part the sea with his staff, verses 15 through 18. And then there's this part about God hardening Pharaoh's heart. That's where it gets a little complicated for me.
Yeah, that's a concept that's been debated for centuries. It brings up all sorts of questions about free will, divine intervention, good and evil. Some people see it as God controlling Pharaoh, while others say it's more like God letting Pharaoh's stubbornness play out.
So how do we make sense of it then?
I think the important thing is to remember that this story is being told from a specific point of view. It's offering one perspective on how God works in the world. The idea is that God is orchestrating everything, even the things that seem bad or confusing to us, to achieve a greater goal.
So there's a bigger plan even if we can't see it.
Exactly.
All right, that makes sense. So verses 19 and 20, we see the angel of God and the pillar of cloud that's been leading the Israelites. It moves to their rear, like a strategic move. What's the significance of that?
Well, remember the cloud. It keeps showing up throughout Exodus. It represents God's presence, protection, guidance. So this movement, it's not just a physical thing. It symbolizes God taking a defensive position, putting himself between the Israelites and those chasing them.
Like a shield.
Exactly.
Wow. And then the climax, verses 21 and 22, Moses stretches out his hand and the sea splits. Walls of water on each side, dry ground in the middle. I mean, can you even picture that?
It's like the impossible happening right in front of you. The laws of nature bending to God's will. Imagine those Israelites just moments ago facing certain death, now walking through the sea.
That must have been unbelievable. And the Egyptians, seeing all this unfold, what's going through their minds, they've just witnessed something straight out of a dream or a nightmare, depending on where you're standing.
Totally. It's a moment of shock, disbelief, maybe even a little bit of awe, despite what they're trying to do. And yet they keep going right into this impossible passage.
Driven by those hardened hearts. Verses 24 through 28 tell us that as morning breaks, God throws the Egyptian army into chaos. Chariot wheels start coming off, panic sets in.
Think about those chariots. They represented Egyptian power, their technology. And now that very symbol becomes their downfall. It's like their own pride. Their refusal to acknowledge a power greater than themselves is what destroys them.
Wow, that's powerful. And then the waters come crashing back in. The whole army is swallowed up. Not a single one survives.
It's a moment that shows God's power, not just to the Israelites, but to anyone who hears this story. It's like this reminder that there are forces in this world that are way beyond us, capable of both amazing and terrifying things.
Yeah, I can see that. And the Israelites, verses 29 through 31, They're safe on the other side. They witness this whole display of power. What do you think that does to their faith?
It changes them, transforms them. It's one thing to hear about God's power. It's another to experience it firsthand. This isn't just about leaving Egypt. It's about creating a new identity, a new understanding of their relationship with God. It's the birth of a nation marked by a miracle that will define them forever.
That's incredible. We've just scratched the surface here. There's so much more to uncover about this story. And we will. But first, a quick message from our sponsors.
We'll be right back. We just walked through the Red Sea crossing, but there's so much more to this story than just a dramatic escape.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
This story stuck with people for centuries. Inspired art, music, you name it. Why do you think that is?
I think it taps into something universal. You know, that yearning for freedom, the struggle against impossible odds, the idea that faith can move mountains. Literally, in this case, it resonates with people no matter who they are or where they come from.
That makes a lot of sense. But let's get real here for a second. I mean, we're not facing down chariots these days. So how can we, living in the 21st century, actually apply the lessons of this ancient story? What's the takeaway beyond a cool historical account?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Take the Israelites' fear, for example. They were facing what looked like certain death, yet they found a way to keep moving forward.
So it's about finding that inner strength, even when things feel hopeless.
Exactly. It's about trusting that even when we can't see the path, there's something bigger guiding us. You can call it faith or resilience, or maybe just plain stubborn hope, but it's that inner compass that keeps us going.
Reminds me of Moses telling them to stand still and witness God's salvation. That's a tough one. Our instinct is to run, fight, do something when we're afraid.
Oh, absolutely. But sometimes the bravest thing we can do is surrender control, not in a passive way, but in a way that allows us to tap into a source of strength that's beyond our own understanding.
So it's not about blind faith. It's about finding that anchor, that source of strength that helps us through those tough times.
Yes, and that anchor doesn't have to be a deity or anything like that. It can be anything that gives you that sense of grounding, maybe a community, a belief system, even nature itself. It's what helps you weather the storms.
I see what you mean. Now, another thing that struck me was the Israelites weren't just a bunch of individuals running around. They were a community. They had each other's backs. There was a lesson there too, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Exodus story really emphasizes collective action. They leaned on each other, celebrated together, and in the end, they triumphed together. It shows the power of shared struggle and how important community is in overcoming challenges.
And that's something we can definitely apply today. We've got global issues that need that kind of collective effort.
Precisely, whether it's climate change or social injustice or whatever you're passionate about. We can't solve these problems on our own. We need that sense of community, that shared purpose to create real change. The Exodus story reminds us of that.
It does. And let's not forget, this story is about hope. The Israelites were slaves for generations. Their situation seemed impossible, but they never gave up on the dream of freedom.
That's what kept them going. It wasn't just about escaping physical slavery. It was the belief that things could get better, that their suffering had meaning, and that message is timeless.
It's like the Red Sea wasn't just a body of water. It was a symbol of everything holding them back crossing Canaan. It wasn't just about geography. It was about breaking free from despair, from the idea that things could never change.
Beautifully put. And that's a message we need more than ever these days.
It is. Speaking of messages, we can't ignore the leadership angle Moses, despite all the doubts and the resistance he was committed to, leading his people to freedom.
He's a fascinating figure thrown into this impossible situation, yet he rose to the occasion. He found strength in his faith, inspired others to follow, and ultimately led them to liberation.
He wasn't perfect, though, was he?
No leader is, but he had a vision, a strong sense of right and wrong, and this unwavering belief in his mission. Those are essential qualities for any leader, no matter what the situation is.
It's a good reminder that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having that conviction, the ability to inspire others to do something bigger than themselves.
Right. And the Exodus story shows us that leadership can change things completely, not just for individuals, but for whole communities, even nations.
That's pretty amazing. Now, there's one more thing I want to explore before we wrap up this part of the dive. This idea of divine intervention throughout Exodus line. God is presented as an active force guiding things, performing miracles. How do we square that with our modern understanding of how the world works?
That's a tough question, one that people have been wrestling with for ages. It's important to remember that this story was written in a specific time and place. The belief in divine intervention was just part of life back then.
So we need to remember the lens through which it was written.
Exactly. We can't look at an ancient text through our modern worldview, but that doesn't mean there's no meaning in it. Even if we don't take every word literally, there's still a powerful message about hope, resilience, and the idea that good can win over evil.
So it's not about believing every single detail. It's about finding those underlying truths that speak to us.
Yes, and I think that's the key to understanding any ancient text. Approach it with respect, curiosity, and an open mind, and you might be surprised what you discover.
Well said. We've covered a lot here, from the historical context to the deeper metaphorical meanings of the Red Sea, but there's even more to explore. We'll be right back to talk about the legacy of the Exodus story and how it's impacted art, culture, and spirituality. So we've talked about what happened at the Red Sea, how it can apply to our lives. But this story, it didn't just stay in the Bible. I mean, it's everywhere. Art, music, even politics. How'd that happen?
It's become this universal symbol, hasn't it? Like, how many times have you heard parting the Red Sea used to describe overcoming some impossible thing?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's like it's woven into how we talk. But why this story? What makes it so powerful?
I think it speaks to that deep human desire for freedom, for breaking free from whatever's holding us back. It's this reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's still hope for something better.
Okay, so we've got that, the metaphorical power, but let's get specific. How has this story actually shown up in art and culture over time?
Well, visual art's a good place to start. Michelangelo, for example, he depicted it right there on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel.
Talk about a grand stage.
Yeah.
It really makes you realize how much this story's permeated Western art.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the classics. Artists of all kinds, painters, sculptors, filmmakers, they've all been drawn to the Red Sea. It's like each generation finds a new way to interpret it.
Like a visual echo through time.
Exactly. And then you've got music. Think about Handel's Israel in Egypt. That chorus about crossing the Red Sea, one of the most powerful pieces of music ever written.
Chills every time.
It's not just classical, though. From gospel to pop music, that theme of overcoming obstacles, of finding liberation, it pops up again and again.
Like the story just taps into something so fundamental it goes beyond any one genre.
That's it, and we can't forget literature. The Exodus story, with its themes of freedom, oppression, it's inspired writers forever.
It feels like it was made for epic storytelling.
Doesn't it? You've got ancient interpretations in modern novels like The Red Tent. It just keeps captivating us.
Constantly being reinterpreted, finding new meaning.
And then there's the political side of things. Think about the impact this story's had on movements for social change. Oppressed groups throughout history have looked to Exodus for hope, like a blueprint for their own struggles.
Yeah, it becomes this rallying cry, right? This reminder that liberation's possible, even when things seem impossible.
Exactly. That image of the Israelites escaping slavery, it's resonated with those fighting for civil rights, for independence, for basic human dignity. It's a testament to how powerful this story is, how it goes beyond religion and becomes a symbol of hope for everyone.
So the Red Sea, it's not just a historical event. It's this living narrative that still shapes how we see the world, how we see ourselves.
It really is, and it leaves us with some big questions. What Red Seas are we facing? What feels impossible to overcome? And where can we find that strength, that faith to keep moving forward even when we're not sure what's ahead?
Those are some really powerful questions. And maybe that's the true legacy of the Red Sea, not just the miracle itself, but that message of hope, of resilience, of that human spirit that just won't give up.
Beautifully put. May we all find the courage to part our own Red Seas and come out stronger and more hopeful on the other side.
And on that note, thank you for joining us on this Deep Talks. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking those deeper meanings.